So what do you make of, I mean, I really appreciate this frame, again, that there's this ongoing dialectic, and it's the dialectic itself which is interesting, but then throughout Tibetan history, at least, maybe not so much Indian, but you get people picking a side and being very polemical. Buddha nature is this, or emptiness is, or isn't, and then people like Mipam, who try to sort of split the difference or find the middle way, or sort of, are they trying to solve the dialectic? Are they trying to like heal the divide? Are they? I mean, what's the sort of the philosophical move there?
Yeah, in terms of philosophical moves, I mean, I think of it, maybe in parallel or in conversation with, like if we think of continental philosophy and in France with Derrida and this play of difference, that it's not resolved, this type of, everything is deferred to something else, and there's no transcendent signified, is his language, that kind of closes the dialectic and puts an end and finishing point on it. So it's open-ended and it's groundless, and there's no end to the dialectic on one side. And we see that more in the Madhyamaka, particularly in Tibet, like the Prasangika Madhyamaka discussions of the nature of reality and emptiness. And then on the other side, more of a German Hegelian dialectic, where there's a thesis, let's say, of presence, an antithesis of absence, and then there's the synthesis. Okay, we have this unity, and then it's closed again. So there is a way that the unity can be closed and become just another thesis again. And then again, you can say it's this kind of this dialectical ascent, or into some kind of deepening into the ground of subjectivity, or beyond subjectivity into the nature of reality. I guess that's how I think of the dialectic between these two dialectics, and then it gets,
Can you tease that out? Then what does it look like then with Buddha nature, or emptiness and luminosity? How does that look?
Right. So I think this.
Give some examples of it, maybe.
Yeah, I think this ongoing dialectic is important for emptiness, right? There is no ground, and there's just constantly pulling the rugs out of any kind of idea or determinate notion or concept of what is Buddha nature, what is the nature of mind, what is emptiness, on one hand, and then the, let's say like more of the analytic approach, and then more of the meditative approach, whereas there's the resting meditation as opposed to an analytic meditation where it's not simply trying to undermine the grounds anymore, or conceptual ideas about emptiness or Buddha nature, but just living it or expressing it or performing Buddha nature. And I was speaking with Paul about Dogen, about his being. Sitting is like being. It is performing Buddha nature. Just sitting meditation. So rather than some seeing meditative practice as instrumental to some other goal. I also think of this, and this is something that Mipam does, is he integrates this analytical approach, or what he calls the study and contemplation approach, with the quintessential instructions approach, or more of a meditative or yogic approach. And I tend to think of this analytic approach as a bottom-up approach, where it's there can be interventions, conceptual and analytical, critical interventions into mistaken presuppositions about the world and who one is and what is real, and it kind of keeps that open-ended dialectic. It keeps it keeps you sharp and on your toes and questioning. Whereas the top-down model is this model more that I think has resonated with Buddha nature more historically in terms of contemplative practices of like the resting meditation, where there is always already some fundamental nature of existence and human experience that is participating in some way in the unobscured and undefiled nature of the world. And so this top-down model is more, less about constructing some right understanding, but around just kind of not getting in the way of the nature of things. Whereas the bottom-up model is trying to use methods to overcome obstruction. So in a way, they're not really different methods, or not necessarily. This isn't the example I was thinking, but another example I use, or I've been thinking about, is like learning to get rid of some phobia or some false identity. Like if you're an anorexic, you think you have some mistaken body image, or if you're afraid of frogs, for instance, you don't have to like necessarily learn something new or develop some new quality, but you just kind of discover that actually frogs, aren't that scary, or that your body isn't actually like in some way that it's not. So there's one way of cultivation that is just kind of dropping your stories or narratives that are not real on one hand, and then there's another model, and that I think of as the top-down model. And the other model is like learning a skill that you kind of, in stages, you take steps to develop this skill of like whatever, learning to ride a bicycle, and so eventually it becomes effortless. But so is like not being an anorexic or not being scared of frogs. It's also kind of effortless. So these two can be complementary, and they don't have to be incompatible, but there is an important sense in which they are different, and there is an important sense in which each way kind of has potential problems. And I think that's also with this dialectic of presence and absence. There's potential problems with Buddha nature understood as a real presence, and then there's problems with emptiness, in like nihilism. So, and both of these extremes are potentially problematic, and so each one keeps the other one, is a corrective to the other. And so I think that's a lot of what Mipam does, is kind of use these different techniques and methods and texts in an integrated way. And going back to this dialectic, I think that only Buddha nature in the sense of presence, is not necessarily different from a lot of religious traditions, like whether it's Hindu or Christian, or some type of pure nature in the world, or a soul, let's say, something like soul-like. But what's distinctive about Buddhism is the emptiness side of this dialectic, the absence, and that's why I like thinking about Buddha nature as a kind of not this first swing of the dialectic, but the third. So it's kind of this intuitions about the world, or about real things, that is critique through emptiness, and then Buddha nature comes in at this this resolution stage, where it's a post-critical or the dialectic of presence and absence has already occurred, and there's this next movement of the pendulum that keeps it alive. So I think there's an important logic of this structure of the three turnings of the wheel. So the third turning is really explicitly about Buddha nature, and so it's not a first turning teaching, at least not explicitly. And so I think that's important to overcome these kind of simplistic, naive understandings about Buddha nature being just a simple ground of being or some type of real essence that kind of somehow resides in your body-mind complex.